Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Thank you for everyone to attending for today's session. I see a lot of my students are here, which is great. Um, just want to say that we have a great speaker, and I'll give you a minute speak in a minute about his background, but I want to promote the organization, the Project Management Institute, as well as the Mass Bay chapter. Please consider going to other roundtables. I believe there's a newer one on women in project management, which is fairly new. There's also networking events and other activities within the Mass Bay chapter where they're trying to get more uh, in-person activities. There's also the national chapter, the Project Management Institute overall, and they do have a yearly conference and other activities that you can be part of. There's also volunteer opportunities for students, but I do know that it's quite competitive and there's a lot of people that are interested, but feel free to reach out to them as well if you want to get more involved with project management. Um, Again, this roundtable is called Evidence-Based Project Management Roundtable, where we try to combine both theory and the real world and bridge the gap. And today we have a great speaker, Sundar, who will be presenting. Before I continue, I just want to give you a little bit about his background. Sundar is a PhD candidate in human movement and rehabilitation sciences at Northeastern, combining expertise in neurosciences, biotechnology, and rehab to tackle complex challenges in the healthcare system. With advanced degrees from Johns Hopkins University and Tokyo Medical and Dental University, his work bridges cutting-edge technology and human behavior. His research includes eye tracking to decode autism-related behaviors and developing gamified decision support tools for disabilities management, earning him recognition through prestigious grants such as Spark Fund and Acorn Innovation Grant. Uh, he's a dynamic presenter, mentor, and innovator, and he's passionate about leveraging AI, a topic we all love, extended reality, and sensor-based technologies to revolutionize healthcare and improve lives. Um, with that, I'd like to hand it off to Sundar. Take it away.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that introduction. Let me just start sharing my screen. Give me a second. Okay. Can all of you see my screen? Is that good?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. So because I'm in screen sharing mode, I've asked John to just monitor the chat if there's any questions. I don't want it to be like a lecture, so please feel free to interrupt me if something is unclear or you want a little more explanation on it. Feel free to just unmute yourself and talk because it's difficult for me to look at the video as well as the screen for prompts. So yeah, feel free to do that. So let me just get started. So thank you, John, for that introduction. So I thought for the Project Management Institute Roundtable, what might be a good ideal topic for discussion. I thought Agile, especially for a research lab or sort of an unpredictable workplace would be a good suit because not many people think about Agile in places where things are going unstructured and there's no real organization, especially in research. I'm talking it from my own lab standpoint because we've adopted Agile for the last 2.5 years and we've been working well. I want to use these principles and give some thoughts on how this can be applicable to other unstructured environments where we can boost productivity and stuff. So I'll just get started on that. My topic is lab rats meet agile because we're all lab rats working on something. Sometimes it's focused and sometimes it's not. So I just wanted to call my talk that faster science and fewer headaches. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Research labs are where discovery thrives, but they're also notorious for inefficiencies, there's long delays and miscommunication. Today, we'll discuss how Agile, a framework that's usually known for transforming industries like software development, can empower research teams to innovate faster, collaborate better, and reduce unnecessary headaches. Let's explore how Agile can fit into the world of research. Here's the roadmap for today's discussion. I'll talk about a little bit about the introduction to Agile, which is where we understand what Agile is and why it's valuable. Then challenges in research labs, sort of identify the common pain points in lab environments. Agile principles and practices, explore the foundational ideas of Agile, adapting Agile for research, we can learn how we can modify the concept of agile for unique needs in lab or similar environments. Implementation steps, how can we get started on, like some practical steps on starting agile in your lab. Some tools and techniques that, we can use to streamline workflows. Some case studies, which are like real world examples from our lab and neighboring lab who have adopted agile and sort of like successful in getting things done. Some best practices and tips, like key takeaways for like successful implementation of Agile, and a Q&A where I want to like answer people's questions there. But again, like I said, feel free to interrupt me in the middle. If something is unclear, you don't have to wait until the end. So Agile, what is Agile? Agile is a project management framework that emphasizes iterative process, collaboration, and responsiveness to change. The key features include breaking down tasks, where Agile focuses on dividing work into manageable increments. It also focuses on continuous feedback, where we have regular reviews and updates to refine the process. The process can be a project, it can be a piece of the project, or it can be any other like elements of it. It also fosters team collaboration. So it highly believes that cross-functional teams can work together for shared goals. Most people think agile is more rigid. It's like a structured approach, but in reality, agile isn't about rigid rules. It's about adaptability, making it sort of like a good fit for research. So what's the difference between, like agile in industry versus research labs? Because we are trying to tackle sort of like different problems here. In industry, we have more product focused outcomes. We kind of have predictable deliverables because we already know what the output of the goal or the project is going to be. We sort of have tight deadlines because, we have to deliver the output to the client in a particular time frame, and we have structured workflows because we have exactly the right amount of team, the right amount of like labor and everything like sorted out before the project actually begins. So it's sort of like very structured approach. When you contrast that with research labs, it's more of exploration focused because you try to answer your hypothesis, which might or might not work, and you have to always, be on the get-go of altering your experimental paradigms, trying out something new. So it's sort of like very unstructured, but there's also like a sort of like end product, like that's at the end where you have to like prove or disprove your hypothesis. The outcomes are very unpredictable. You might be completely wrong and, like took off on a wrong foot on your hypothesis in research. But how can we use agile there is the question which we'll answer through this talk. We have flexible timings. Obviously, we don't have very rigid timings as opposed to industry. Here, the rigid timings are mostly for grants, but that also, if you miss a cycle, you can always go for the other one. So it's sort of like flexible, and even in terms of like the workflow, it's flexible. And here it's more of iterative and evolving methods because you try something, it doesn't work, you modify it, try again. So it's always on the loop where you adjust and refine the process, the same process, but sort of like try to adjust it to the needs that you have. So it's about like doing this again and again. So the adaptability of Agile makes it possible to accommodate the evolving and uncertain nature of research. What are the common challenges in research labs? So they have like unique obstacles that I believe Agile can address. The first one would be siloed workflows because poor communication between teams. You work as like the research project teams or you work as different organizations within the lab. They hamper progress because you're not talking to each other. You're not sharing who's, like what's the update in each other's project. Maybe you might be doing a common mistake across groups, but without like proper communication, that cannot be communicated to the entire of lab. And, people might be wasting time and just doing the same thing again and again. We have long feedback loops because delayed analysis slow the pace of innovation because you send a piece of work or a piece of update to your advisor or your immediate boss that can be a postdoc, and that they might be busy, so it takes around a week's time to like get back to you, as opposed to if you like share your update with a couple of people in your lab. It's easy for them to like give feedback then and there because someone might have done this before, and like they might just give a shot at it at the right time that you're expecting it. Changing priorities, like new discoveries can disrupt like planned workflows. So it's always I mean, like in research, it's good to go with the new discoveries, but also it's always good to keep track of what we originally started. Are we really going off tangent, with the new discoveries? Is it really setting you to a different path or something? So we should always have a system to keep track of what we started. It's always good to sidetrack, but if that detour is going to be very tangential, then we have to like make sure we are getting back on track and, like trying to answer the question that we originally framed. And then the resource management, tracking tasks and allocating resources is often informal and unclear because you don't know who's doing what, what's available, etc. So we have to like have those the resources on track. All these I feel like can be overcome by leveraging agiles like collaborative and iterative methods. Why Agile and research labs? Agile offers several benefits tailored to the dynamic environment of research labs. The first and foremost is it encourages collaboration, and that improves teamwork and knowledge sharing. It supports flexibility. It can adjust workflows as discoveries unfold, and if the pipeline of the project changes, you can always use different tools and softwares to like track the progress. It sort of like streamlines the resources that's available, so efficiently tracks and prioritizes the tasks that's on hand for like the next goal or the next immediate goal of the project. It fosters accountability because you are sort of not directly, but then passively forced to like share your updates. But that also gives a chance for everyone to know that if you're on track, if at all you're doing something wrong, there can be someone who can let you know at the beginning steps so that you don't end up wasting a lot of time doing that. And down the lane, I'm going to give you some examples as to what worked in our lab and how this concept of sharing and stand-ups has helped us save a lot of time and sort of improve collaboration between teams, even though we work on completely different projects. Um, the next foremost important point is like the core agile practices. Agile is implemented through practical method. Sorry. So it operates on the core principles. The first one being individuals and interactions. Collaboration takes precedence over rigid processes here. So we want to collaborate between teams. And the question here being, what if two different teams are working on completely different projects? But if you like sort of like sit and think, some of the principles that worked on two different projects might be similar, or the process of solving a problem or analyzing data or like the workflow or the pipeline can be similar and can be applied to like different projects, even though on the superficial level it might look very different. So here it prioritizes collaboration so that you don't want to make the same mistake another team did, and that's going to save a lot of like time and resources that goes into doing that particular process. The working deliverables, progress is measured incrementally because when it comes to research, you often find yourself like just reading papers for 2 weeks. And then finally, what you get out of that is just a half-page summary of, oh, this is what I learned from the literature, which is good. But sometimes it goes unfocused where you just read a bunch of papers and there's no a measurable metric to say that, like this, the time that's spent reading these papers are actually meaningful. So always have a question or like a milestone as to why you're reading a bunch of papers. What is it that you're trying to get out of it? Having that structure is easy. I'm talking about like deliverables in terms of reading paper, but this could be like, okay, I'm trying this new experiment. What is it I want to get out of it? I mean, that experiment can be a good experiment or a failed experiment, but what is it that we're trying to answer and keeping a track of it? So putting the concept of agile into all these like unpredictable workflows gives us some sort of sense of the progressive metrics, and we can track of if you're doing things right. The next one would be the stakeholder collaboration. So we engage almost everyone in the lab, which is PIs, funders in some cases, if it's an internal funding within the university, and then the collaborators. We want everyone to be on the same page who are involved in the project so that anyone can share any of their experiences or common mistakes or some sort of like precautionary measures before we do something off tangent or before we do something that's sort of like wrong. And then responding to change. We always want to have the mindset to adapt to new data and insights as they arise, because unlike corporate industries where you have like a good workflow, here things have to change. For example, I analyze the data. Now I find that this is what my new data tells. Then I need to modify the experiment. I need to modify the way I collect data. So the pipeline changes. And Agile is easy to modify in that sense that for the new workflow or the new experiment, you can have an Agile page like a Jira board or a Trello board to like track progress and modify the milestones that you had before based on the new data. So that where it's easy to like adapt to all these things. Um, the next one would be the core Agile practices. Agile is implemented through these four methods primarily. The first one being sprints, sprints as in like what we call in like races, where it's a period where you just chunk your work. The sprints can be 1 to 2 weeks long. It's just time box work period. For example, if you say, I have data from 20 patients that I need to analyze. Setting a realistic timeline for those data would be ideal. For example, I can say I want to analyze the 20 people's worth of whatever my experiment data, the physiological data, the psychological assessments and everything. And we can say a realistic timeline of 2 weeks. So our milestone is to analyze all the 20 people's data by the end of 2 weeks. So that'll be your sprint. And you'll be doing different tasks. For example, the first 2 days, I want to analyze all the assessments, like the psychological assessments. The next 2 or 3 days, I want to work on the data, like a pre-processing of my data from the experiment. The next 4 days, I want to do the post-processing of the data, like those sort of things you sort of like analyze and keep like smaller milestones so that it works easily. That's the sprint. In our lab, we have 2 weeks of sprint because that gives us enough window to prioritize multiple tasks and then sort of like have a progress map of if you're doing things right. And then having daily stand-ups, which is just brief meetings to discuss progress, challenges, and next steps. We still have our daily stand-ups. It's usually like an audio call. We use a platform called Discord, which is something similar to Slack. We just join on this group call where it's just an audio call. Each of us get like a minute or so to like just say that, hey, I was working on so and so data processing yesterday. I'm planning to continue it today. I don't see any like hurdles or roadblock in the process. So that's all. So that's going to give me like 30 seconds. And if at all I have a roadblock, I can just share that in the group call so that anyone who's experienced something similar can, just hop in and say, hey, be careful in doing this or something like that. Or if your PI joins the call, he or she can give you some sort of like advice on how to approach this particular analysis so that you don't waste a good amount of time and you're being more productive there. Um, the next one would be backlogs, which is organized list of tasks such as like experiments or data analysis. Often when it comes to like a research project, there's like multiple things that you have to like prioritize. For example, first designing the experiment, then finding the right population. At least in my case, it's more of like human research. So finding the right population, scheduling them, timing them, and identifying people who wants to like collect data and then like making sure the data is collected properly. There's writing of that and then there's data analysis. So one simple tasks like collecting data has 10 other tasks associated with it, and those come under the category of like backlogs. For example, you can just collect one person's data today and then it's going to take you almost 10 more days from today to analyze that particular person's data. So you have a lot of like backlog works that you want to prioritize. And if we don't have a tracking system, then we just forget and we remember at the last minute when we're trying to submit a publication or a conference abstract, and that's when we actually realize that such things have happened. So to avoid that, we want to have like an organized list of backlogs, prioritize what is more important, grab the task from the backlog into your active sprint, and then like start working on it. So that way the list of backlogs is going to like really help you overcome some hurdles in finishing up tasks that are associated with one big task. Retrospective usually happens like at the end of the sprint. So at the end of 2 weeks, you reflect on the successes and identify areas for improvement. Maybe you say that, I did my data analysis wrong. I want to improve that because I wasted time doing something that was not relevant, and, make a note of it. Or you can say that I could have collaborated with someone who's an expert in this field. I didn't do that. So like I could have been more productive in that sense. So You just take a minute to like reflect how the last 2 weeks or the week of the sprint was with the tasks that you have, and like change and adopt goals for the next sprint, which is the next 2 weeks. So there's always a constant and iterative period of like reflection, and you can always like modify your goals moving forward. What are the common agile methodologies? The first one would be Scrum, which is best for collaborative and time box projects. For folks who have worked in corporate world, they would have used something called Jira, where like people assign tasks to you, and the people would be like your team lead or something, or someone above that position. They assign tasks to particular associates about this is what to be done, and they'll give you a time frame for finishing that task. On top of that, usually those tasks will have something called the exit criteria. So what is considered for the task to be done? So you have to check a few boxes to make sure like the task is actually done. So that's a good way to have exit criteria. When I say I want to read papers and I read papers, like that's not a good exit criteria. I have to have defined goals for, okay, I want to read papers and answer these questions because I'm unclear about these topics in my research. So I want to have these list of tasks before I get into the habit of reading papers. And then at the end of reading, like let's say 10 papers, I want to make sure like, did I get enough information to like have an idea to answer this particular question that I had in mind? Or did it clear my doubts on a particular concept? So that way, the Scrum methodology really helps you, like sort of like get work done. The next one would be like the Kanban, which is sort of ideal for continuous workflow management. It gives you like a visual board, like a whiteboard, or let's say a Trello board. And we have like multiple softwares, which I can talk about in the later slides. But there are multiple like softwares and tools to help you visualize your workflow, like from your starting point and your ending point. It's like the loading bar in your browser, like when you see like it's loading fast and you're close to the completion, you get that adrenaline rush. Though the Kanban board usually helps you do that. You visualize the progress and you be like, hey, I'm halfway done, or I'm 75% done, I'm three-fourths done, I'm almost close to completion. So it gives you a boost and a satisfaction that you're actually progressing. And in case you're actually stagnant in one particular point, the visual board tells you, for at least a week, I'm still in the same stage. What is happening? So it gives you time to reflect and sort of like understand what's going wrong, and like sort of modify your process to make it more productive. These days, mostly in our lab, we have a hybrid approach. We have Scrum and Kanban so that we get the best of both worlds sort of understanding. So it's always good to have hybrid approaches. But to start off, I think we can always start with something very simple and then try to build on that. Um, the next topic would be adopting Agile for research labs. Um, I would say we want to like customize sprints for exploratory tasks because in research, sometimes all you do is for a week is just reading papers, so it might feel like you're not doing a lot of things. So in those cases, you can actually have sprints for 3 weeks rather than 2 weeks, where one week you just read papers and take notes. The second week you process information, try to answer the question that you had before you read papers. And in the last week, it's more about implementing what you learned. So it's always good to have sprints, and where for example, if the task is very simple, it's only like data analysis, you can just have sprints to be 1 week and then check your progress the week later if it doesn't really deserve 2 weeks sort of thing. So always good to customize sprints, customize goals, and customize the resources that's used for that particular sprint. And when I say resources, it could be research assistants, like other folks volunteering in the lab. It could be patients. It could be anything, like not really material resources. It could be anything. And always use Kanban boards for visual tracking. I use something called the Monday.com that tells me, it has like color shades and stuff on different tasks. It lets me sort of organized based on like different domains. For example, writing versus manuscript versus research versus participant recruitment. So I can have different task sections, and then I can actually visualize the progress, which gives me color code. If it's red, then it's not being done for a while. Yellow and green, and so something like the task is in progress, task is done, like sort of that. That gives me a sense of how many tasks are there for me, and it gives me a boost to like finish it within the sprint that I've planned for. While doing the Scrum concept, it's good to like designate team roles. The product owner, I'm just trying to map the terminology used in corporate world into the research world. The product owner would be the principal investigator in your lab, or if it's a startup, the boss of boss would be your product owner. The Scrum master would be like a postdoc or an assistant professor in the lab, who sort of like assigns different things and make sure things are on progress. The team members would be the researchers, research assistants, which can be PhD students, master students, undergrads, technicians, lab managers, analysts, the other folks working in the lab, towards a project. So this way you can define roles. And based on the roles, like once you have roles, I think it's easier to give them tasks for whatever projects they're working on, and then work on this whole concept of Scrum. It becomes much, much easier. Um, the next topic would be implementing Agile in your lab, So the first step I would say is to assess the current processes. So lab is always a mess. If you've been in a lab, like things just go chaotic in most scenarios. So always this is what's taking long time. Is it just reading papers takes long time, getting feedback from your advisor takes long time, or is it difficult to have group meetings with your like project members? So there are different areas that constitute because different people have different schedules and it's very difficult to bring all of them. Like let's say 5 people are involved in a project, including your advisor. It's going to be highly impossible to bring everyone in the same room. So consider what the problem is, and maybe if meeting in person is going to be a problem, then try to adapt to like a virtual meeting so that everyone can just attend the call and update each other sort of thing. So identifying the current processes and where the bottlenecks in the workflow or the communications are is highly crucial. And then like see how agile concepts can like bring immediate impact. For example, if meeting is impossible in person, then switching it to remote meeting so that people can just attend anywhere. If having a 1 hour meeting is difficult, then cutting down to 2 30-minute meeting along the lane. If weekly meeting is you feel like just redundant because you're not having enough updates, then move it to like a bi-weekly meeting. So always see what works, what doesn't work, and then like sort of like modify the process from there. And these are example domains where the processes can happen. One is like experiment planning, because you tend to read a paper and you want to like replicate an experiment and modify it for your own needs. But sometimes that might not work because it's more of a trial and error sort of thing. So it's always good to get opinion from senior folks as to make sure you're on track and you're not making any mistake. The other one is data analysis. We tend to use all these new fancy techniques, but sometimes, it's really not relevant. You can just do the basic stuff. So always have checkpoints and, like advices from people who have already done this before so that you save time and resource. Writing papers, obviously, like always have it on a Google Doc or an overleaf, because I have writer's block very often. I spend almost a day and then just write half a page of introduction, because that's, unless you're a proficient or prolific writer, writing papers is going to be terribly difficult. So I would really insist putting this doc on an overleaf or a Google Doc so that your advisors and everyone involved in writing papers can see your progress, and that gives you motivation to just write more consistently. You can just write 3 sentences or half a page, like every 2 days. That's okay, but putting that there gives you that motivation, and also like an accountability so that people are watching and you want to like finish this paper as soon as possible. So identifying process there and then like trying to implement agile would be a good start. The second step would be to start small. Like people would say like, oh, I have no idea what agile is. Then it's better to like choose a pilot project or a team to implement agile, which is like a new project that's being started in a lab, which just involves 2 or 3 people, so that it becomes a test ground for testing the agile concept. And you can just begin with tools. You don't need to have like sprints. At least you can just have an informal sprint where you can just have a few tasks highlighted on a board so that people can see and track the progress of if the tasks are getting done in a week or so. Basic tools like Whiteboard, Trello board, or Jira should do. So that'll be sort of like easy. and establish clear goals. Like I said, the goal is not just reading paper. You have to be very definitive about like, I want to answer XYZ after reading these papers. My exit criteria is I have a clear definition of XYZ at the end of a week or 2 weeks or whatever your sprint is. So clear goals and identifying resources that's possibly required to finish those goals and the realistic duration of how long it might take. So that'll be like, starting small and implementing agile. And the third step would be to like create agile cycles, which is the first step would be to like plan where you break down projects into smaller deliverables. I can't be like the research that I've done for the last 4 years. I can't be like, I'm going to do this as that. That cannot be my goal, like answering this big hypotheses of mine. So I have to like break it down. What's like the first step that I have to do in order to answer the hypothesis, which is the bigger picture. So break down the projects into very small, even if it's like, um, just creating the experiment or coding this experiment in Python or any like programming languages. That would be an ideal first step to like start, or reading papers to get an understanding of the experiment that you're going to do. So that will be a good ideal step, but make sure you have a good exit criteria for finishing that particular goal. So break down projects into smaller deliverables and then execute the task within defined sprints. If you have set a realistic deadline, based on feedback from your advisors and senior folks in the lab, you should be able to finish it. If you're not able to finish the task in your defined, sprint time, then there's something wrong in the workflow that gives you, like when you have the moment of reflection at the end of your sprint, make sure your workflow is good and you're not doing anything wrong in the pipeline or the workflow that you planned for that particular task. The third one is to review. So evaluate the outcomes after each sprint. Have you done good, bad, whatever has to improve or whatever has to just stand by? Just do that with a bunch of people. And there's no point to think that, people are going to judge or, my progress is small. Any progress is good progress. And most of the labs understand that. Most of the times why Agile fail in lab works is people are afraid to say that I only did this one small task yesterday, which is fine because when you start small and like you just do it consistently, you can actually get a lot of work done. But when you just think about it as I've not done enough as the other senior folks in the lab, like that puts you in trouble and you just tend to like procrastinate a lot of things and eventually you try to cram a lot of work, which might not be good at the end of the or closer to the deadline. That deadline can be anything, any sort of like deliverables. You want to reflect and conduct retrospectives, which idea happens at the end of the sprint with the team to make sure like your workflow is good and you want to continue or improve some sort of like workflows. So those are I think are the three important steps for implementing Agile in research. The tools, I would say for task management in our lab, we use Trello and Jira, and I personally use Notion and Monday.com for my personal, like goal tracking, which involves my personal work as well as professional work. So my personal board is on Notion and Monday.com, and as a lab, we use Trello and Jira. Asana is a new one, which is sort of like similar to Jira. I haven't tried, but I've heard that it's a good tool. For collaboration, I have my lab's Discord server, which is where the whole of the lab communicates. And just for my own team projects, where I lead two projects here, I have Microsoft Teams because that works for most of my team members. So we do our chatting and sharing of documents in Microsoft Teams. Slack is used for my other collaboration, like, sort of like student clubs and stuff. But mostly I use Microsoft Teams and Discord. Zoom can be good for calls like this meeting, but oftentimes we try to meet in person because that gives us a good rapport and we tend to see each other. But Zoom also works if in person is going to be difficult or people are in like different geographical locations. Visualization, Kanban boards are good. Trello has a feature for Kanban boards, so you can just have your tasks visualized and the progress visualized. The Gantt charts are also another way of like visualizing progress and like the sort of completion for a particular task. For documentation, Jira comes with Confluence, so you can have a documentation file within Confluence. You can also use Google Docs. I, again, like personally use Notion to keep track of my meeting notes, my, like things to do and things to like, like poke people again, or if I have to be in touch with some folks. So I tend to use Notion, which is even the pro features are free for like students, but yeah, feel free to use other softwares like There's a notes feature in Microsoft as well, but I feel like Notion is much better. So these are the common tools that people usually use, and even my neighboring labs tend to use these sort of things. Um, some case studies. So problem happens in lab in multiple areas, and I just wanted to pick a few scenarios to like explain a few things. The first one would be like streamlining data analysis. So when you're new to lab, when I was like a first year PhD or a second year PhD student, I had no good clue. I know like there are XYZ ways of like proceeding with data analysis, but sometimes, I just do something my senior or a fellow lab member has already done, and it's not documented properly. So there's no like a Google sheet or somewhere to go and see that, hey, this person has done this particular way and it has failed. So don't do this for this kind of data. So we don't have logs for those kind of things. So uh, there's always like redundant efforts in data processing. So one of the solution is to organize tasks into sprints using Agile. So when you put that, the tasks can be seen by multiple people in the lab or at least in the team, and they'll tell you that, like whatever your plan might not work, so why don't you change the plan? So you'll get opinions from people who have already done this mistake before. And also like you need to assign clear roles for pre-processing, analysis, and review. You might be the only person doing all three steps, or there can be other research assistants doing it. So when it comes to data analysis, it's always good to say that, hey, this person, John, is going to do pre-processing, and then like Mike is going to do analysis, and then have clear goals for each of them and have clear exit criteria. What is considered to be a job done? That's often the mistake we do in like research lab. We just say this has to be done, and we don't know what done constitutes in research. So always have a good exit criteria for a job to be done. What would be the outcome? We'll have like faster analysis, like with fewer errors, because you won't be committing the same error that previous person did. And like you'll have some buffer time to like sit with the data and like identify some sort of like new threat points in exploratory research. The next one would be the collaborative experimentation. Often in labs, you can find people just sitting with their own laptops or their experiment sets and not really talk with people. There's lack of communication between wet lab people if you're working in a wet lab, or even a dry lab, and the computational teams. So they tend to be in two different corners of the lab and not really talk to each other because each of them have their own expertise. So the best way to bring everyone together and share each other's knowledge would be like daily stand-ups to discuss progress. Again, like I said, it's going to take a tops of like 10 minutes, just an audio call, check-in, or you can even like type your stand-up report or something. So whatever works. We tend to do audio calls, and if I'm not able to make it due to some meetings or something, an overlap, we usually type in the group chat to say that, hey, I've done this before. So when you do that, people can see, hey, like Sundar is doing this. Maybe I have to alert him to, be careful of doing some mistakes with the data progress or during experiment collection, or what to be mindful of, etc. And then using Kanban boards for tracking shared tasks, where if four people are involved, we want to have like a common board where everyone can see the progress and then like say, hey, why is this taking time? And then like, you can talk to person who's assigned that particular task and, like help each other out. So you have improved alignment between the teams, which superficially looks very different, but then like they can have like common shared principles that can be discussed and like collaborated. So it improves alignment and efficiency. Um, so some best practices for agile and research is to always start small and scale gradually. If everything is very difficult, just have tasks laid out and the time to finish that, and then slowly include sprints and retrospectives and like Scrum Master, etc. The tailor agile practices to suit the lab's unique needs. It doesn't need to be the generic way of the corporate type. Always like try to modify what works for you and what doesn't. um, Foster a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement. People want to like work alone. I understand that, but then it's always good to like have a check-in with a community of people so that you don't feel you're alone while doing research. At the same time, you get some insights from the expertise other people have, and it's always like good to share progress because you have that sense of belonging to a particular lab, and your progress might be applauded, so that gives you a boost or a motivation to like work better, sort of thing. And again, the same thing with mistakes. So if you think you're going to make a mistake and someone points it out, that's going to save a lot of time for you rather than you spending 2 weeks doing something that's not very relevant to your project goal. Use technologies again. This doesn't need to be pen and paper work. So always have technologies like Jira and Trello and reminders and emails to like streamline workflows. Make sure you're not missing out anything. Okay, some addressing some common concerns here. Most people say that Agile is too rigid for research because they always think the corporate way. But Agile, the concept itself is very flexible and adaptive to exploratory work. You can always have things and meaningful sprints and meaningful goals for exploratory research as opposed to static work like what happens in industries. People say our team doesn't have time for meetings. Short stand-ups are always workable. It's only going to take tops of like 10 minutes. We are a lab of 12 people, and our stand-up at maximum takes 10 minutes. People just have 30 seconds. All I'm going to say is, oh, yesterday I was working on my data analysis for the first half of the day. The second half, I was prepping for this presentation. And today I'm going to like, give this talk and I'm going to, continue data analysis. I don't have any roadblocks. That's going to just take 20 seconds for me to like tell it to the team. And they'll be updated that, I'm doing XYZ today and he doesn't have a problem. So it's always good to have short meetings like stand-ups, which can be just audio calls or texting in a group chat. Um, Again, like the other comment is we lack experience with Agile. So no one is an expert. We've been using Agile for 3 years. I don't think even I know all the features of Agile that's, like given in Jira or any sort of things. You can just start with simple practices and just use the ones that works for you. You don't need to like advance. This is not something where you have to learn everything in entirety. So just have something and adapt something that works for the team and not really go large scale because it's not something you want to like master. This is just to help you streamline workflows and increase productivity. Um, Coming to some last thoughts, I would recommend like some of these books actually like help me doing this, like the Scrum Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time is an interesting book to read if you're new to Scrum, and Kanban, like the successful evolutionary change for your technology. That book also is an interesting read to like understand how to streamline workflows. This is something that I would suggest for any new folks who want to like get into the world of Agile for something that's exploratory. And tools commonly used are like Trello, Jira, and Notion. There's always other tools like Asana, but most commonly used tools that I would suggest would be these. Um, yeah, I think like that brings me to the end. So we want to like integrate these principles in the lab work so that we can work smarter, adapt faster, and achieve like greater impact. So thank you so much for your time for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions from you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sundar. This was a fascinating presentations in the sense that many of us here um, who are familiar with Agile, we used to think about Agile as a product development tool or methodologies, because we're not talking about a single methodology here. But this was great to see how you can apply it to a lab situation. So the floor, thank you very much. So the floor is open for questions. We would like you to share your experience or experiences with the forum. How have you been using Agile at work, and what are the challenges you've been facing, and how you overcome them? Anyone, please turn on your camera, unmute yourself, and let's have a conversation.
There was a question in the chat, Jacques, about the book, Two Times Work in Half Time. Sundar, do you have any strategies from
Sure.
that book? Do you remember what
Yeah.
it was
So
talked
some of
about?
yeah, for sure. So I saw that question as well. Thank you, Harsh, for that question. So I would say some of the strategies that like put in that book, the primary one for that would be to like have defined goals. Like I said, like it has to be as distinct as possible. It's not just like I'm going to get X done. I'm going to be like, what sort of like X is to be done? For example, I'm going to write introduction of a paper is a very like bland goal. So it has to be more like, okay, I'm going to write this particular paragraph of introduction within a week, and what's considered as my exit criteria, what considered as a job done. So if you think about it, that is one of the main strategies discussed in the book to like reduce time and get more productivity, because now you know where to stop. You won't be just going beating around the bush, like I'm writing 1.5 pages of introduction and like trying to trim it down. So always have good defined goals, and not just goals, also like what is considered for that goal to be done. So that's one of the primary strategies. But yeah, we can discuss a little more about like what's discussed in that book a little later time.
Right. That's fantastic. And anyone here with experience transitioning from a waterfall or traditional, they call it. I don't like the word traditional, really. I prefer predictive to adaptive or any form of agile. Anyone has done that? Can you share your experience? How did you convince stakeholders within the organizations to switch?
Okay.
That's actually a very good conversation.
Oh, for sure. So for us, when we started trying to adapt Agile to our research lab, there was always like, resistance. People didn't want to do it. They're like, oh, I can't be on this meeting every day at 9, or, like I can't have sprints. It's very difficult. Research is very unpredictable. But if you just sit and think about it, the way we try to convince is my advisor on board. So she was on board for adapting Agile. So she understood the importance of it. But then the way we try to convince the lab folks is, again, we didn't make it mandatory. We wanted it to be something volunteer where people just come and talk. We tried to make it mandatory, but people were really frightened for attending meetings every day. And like I said, they have a fear of sharing that, like I might have done something less for today compared to the other folks in the lab. So they have this whole inferiority complex when it comes to lab. So we wanted to break that. We wanted to make it like a discussion where you just say, like how you catch up with friends, you'll be like, hey, I did this experiment, it didn't work out. So we tried avoiding having our advisor on the call, even though she was updated at a later point on what was happening. At the initial days, just to break the ice and make people comfortable, we were just discussing among friends as just general update. And slowly that people started to like that, because no, I'm going to tell, there's a friend, there's a colleague who just sits with me. His name is Trent. So I just say, hey, Trent, I did this and this didn't work. Do you have any sort of idea as to why didn't work in the experiment? And he'll be like, yeah, I had a similar problem 2 months back and I tried to solve it. So it became more like a conversation rather than like a professional meeting. So that's one good thing to start. And when I said like having defined goals and having some sort of like exit criteria for that, you actually see that you have a sense of fulfillment that you've actually done a particular task and you move on to like tasks B. So that gives you a motivation to like adapt this whole lifestyle. Even though you think it's exploratory, there are instances where you can have goals and you can adapt to them. So those were the two primary ways where we actually started convincing people. It was a bit of friction at the beginning, but then slowly people started to understand that defining goals and defining exit criteria for those goals were really helping them be productive. And they don't need to worry about it. If you have 10 goals and you have 10 exit criteria, you can just finish it up. Everything is the software. You don't have to have things on your mind. You can just look at the board to see that, hey, I have this task to do today and I have to like finish it up. So that way it becomes much easier, reduces pressure from you. So that way people started to see the importance of it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And thank you very much, Sundar. Anyone else want to add anything to that? No?
There was
Other
a question,
questions?
or do we miss it? How do you handle spikes with research work?
Yeah, I saw that question. So the spikes, that's a very good point, because like for me, um, that was often the case because I was dealing with a lot of like new data analysis where I didn't have the exact tool knowledge. For example, a particular package in R, a particular statistical thing that I need to learn for my data analysis. So the way I started off this is I started telling this in our group meeting to say that, hey, I have this pre-processed data. I'm thinking of doing, let's say, an ANOVA or a multimodal ANOVA for this. And I don't have the knowledge. So people would first tell me if ANOVA would be the right way to do. That would be like step one. And if they say like, like this is going to be a new concept, then we want to allocate a good amount like resource. Like the next way is to like really see if you want to learn ANOVA from its scratch, for example, like from a mathematical equation standpoint of view, or is it enough just you know how to use the ANOVA function in the uh, in R or any sort of like statistical software. So if that's going to be the case, reading about a module or a function is going to just take a day or so for you to like learn that concept. But if you really need to learn a concept, then you need to like put in some sort of like a learning time, like twice or thrice a week, and then like put that into the schedule, but also have defined goals for that learning rather than just telling, I'm going to learn ANOVA. You have to say that I'm going to learn this particular concept of ANOVA. I'm going to do the mathematical derivation and have specific goals if you really want to learn the concept. But oftentimes you don't need the whole concept just for getting work done. If you just know how to use that for your papers and for your analysis, that should be good.
Thank you.
So very, very good, actually, excellent questions. Now, do you have other questions here in the chat? We have?
Yes, I do have a question here if I can.
Yes, please.
Sundar, so research is a very private and closed space. Do you think it's not risky to share your research stuff on a daily basis? What if someone takes my idea and might use it somewhere else?
Oh, usually you share your research on a daily basis with your own team members. So oftentimes, at least what I've seen, I've worked in multiple research labs before, is like everyone has their own project and they work on like specific goals and specific things to be done. So within a lab environment, I would say it's always healthy to like share your progress. No one is going to like steal any of your ideas. Even if at all they steal, you have your advisor to oversee what's happening. So when it comes to publication and giving credit, maybe like let's say you have a new approach for data processing or something, which another team has incorporated. So usually if it's a good lab and with advisor, they give you credit, they acknowledge you in the paper that you're writing, or they tell that, this is from another student in the lab sort of thing. So what I have seen is within the lab, it's always healthy to like share your weaknesses and strengths, and it's not going to go a waste of time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe Victoria has a question. Did you answer that?
Oh yeah. So have you measured if using Agile has sped up your research progress? If yes, what kind of improvement? Perfect. Yeah, that's a that's a great question. Yes, it has helped me. So for me, like I said, I have writer's block. It's easy for me to write non-academic stuff. I write blogs and stuff. So that's easy for me. I can just get it done in a couple of hours. But when it came to writing papers, it was always difficult. That was one thing. So I had like defined goals and defined exit criteria for finishing a paper, let's say, because that's the least liked task for me. I hate writing generally. So, but I have to write in order to like, publish my work and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just write like one half of introduction this week. For that, what is required? I need to read 3 papers. Reading 3 papers in a week, at least for a researcher, is not like that difficult. So I'm going to answer question 1, 2, 3 by reading these papers, and that's all. I'm going to put my writing aside. So I can either get that work done early in the week and, like do something that I like for the remainder of the week, and then move on to next week where my next goal is to like write the second half of introduction. So for writing, it has really improved. And I got like 3 papers like submitted for conferences last year and the year before that, which is good for a full length paper. The second one is reading papers. So before I used to like mindlessly read a lot of papers, and sometimes I digest information. Sometimes, it just goes off because I read the paper, but then I don't make a note of it. It was not very careful reading. So from then on, I had a goal for reading a particular paper and what is it that I want to get out of it, and having a summary, making a note of it, having a tracking spreadsheet for all those things. So help me digest information from the 10 papers I read, and I always had like the important points written down, so I don't need to like go back. If at all I want to go back, I read the summary that I wrote by myself to make sure that if this is a paper that's of interest and I need to like learn a little more about their progress or process that's being used. And third, when it came to I work in a team, I have like 2 other research assistants who work for me in the project. So it was easier for me to like assign tasks to them and have like exit criteria so that I don't need to be behind their back for getting work done. So they move the ticket to done if they understood that this was the exit criteria and if it's solved. So all I need to do was once some task was marked as done, just making sure that was actually done and like things are there on the plate. So that's how it really helped me, and it is still helping me while doing this process.
Fantastic. Any other questions? No one else?
Question related to the adoption of the Agile method to your research. So what I've understood so far is that you've adapted instead of coming to pressure your team into adapting to this methodology, you've put it like a daily practice in my team that fits your needs. So that's been very, very interesting, because instead of getting to know the whole Agile methodology, you've only taken daily steps of how to adapt it to your needs.
Correct.
So my question is, if you recommend this approach based on each of the team's needs, right?
Yes. So for example, my team, because I just have two other people, we don't actually have like tickets, like tickets they call as the tasks in corporate world. So we don't have that. So we have dropped that. But another team in my lab has 5 people working, and they find it better to have tickets and exit criteria. So even within our lab, we have adapted Agile very differently for the team needs. And we don't want it to be like a pressure. Like I said, in corporate, it's mandatory to attend stand-ups and share your progress. We don't want, because there's already like a lot of pressure with research, things not going the way you plan. This is just more like a check-in, because with research, you always want to check in with your friends. So that's why we tend to remove our PI, like the principal investigator, from the calls, so that people are a little more free to know that, you're just talking with friends sort of thing. And it's always good to talk with senior folks in a lab, because they would have done 100 different mistakes, and they don't want you to do the exact same mistakes here. So the stand-ups are really working, and also like defining specific goals, which we think is difficult in exploratory research, is something that we can actually slowly can adapt. If you think about, like I said, like writing a paper is not a goal. I have to write 1 paragraph introduction, which says this. Thinking about this in a very structured way, it lets me, it's like, oh, it's only like 1 paragraph and I can do it in 2 days. That gives me a realistic timeline of, based on my commitments to complete that. So that way it's really helping. Before I used to be like, oh my God, I need to write the introduction. I'm not going to have enough time. I need 2 weeks. I'm going to like overestimate the time or underestimate sort of thing. But when you boil down to a few things, which is very measurable, then it's easier to get the tasks done.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very intuitive approach and
True.
very practical too. So
True.
it helps you adapt on a daily basis. Oh, this serves me, this not. So I'm gonna keep doing what helps me most on a daily basis.
Exactly.
Really, I really like that approach. Thank you.
Fantastic. And many of us, obviously, are familiar with product backlogs containing user stories. And in your case, in your lab, you have any items or tasks, whatever you call it, that will help achieve your goals for whatever the sprint you have, or your entire research. That was actually very interesting thing to learn. So your product backlog, can have user stories, features, tasks, activities, anything that will contribute to your project goals. So that's fantastic.
Exactly.
Awesome.
I think we just have one more question from Sila about
We are
like
up
how,
at time. We're
Okay.
at 1 o'clock, and I know other people. I have to go to another meeting, so I do
No worries.
apologize.
No worries.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's the end of it. I'd like to say many thank yous to you, Sundar, for presenting here. This platform is yours. You're welcome anytime to share ideas. And I'd like to say many thank yous to all of you for attending our first roundtable of the year. Remember, this is a recurring event. I look forward to seeing you next month, the 3rd Thursday of the month at the same time. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Right.